Hi, I'm back after a hiatus of a couple of months, it looks like. I guess I said everything I needed to say about basics of spirituality. So was going to move on to like contemporary events, contemporary society, and all that, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. And I've alluded to this several times. We need to, if we want to develop spiritually, and it's hard to develop spiritually, we have to face not only ourselves, but we have to face society, the society we live in, and what that's like, and how it's affecting us. Um, Spirituality is not natural to our particular culture because there was a split. The split occurred somewhere around the mid 17th century, let's say 1650, when we switched from a kind of religious point of view about life. I'm exaggerating here. It was a gradual buildup from for a couple of centuries there. But eventually, people understood that if they wanted to be better rulers, better thinkers, better whatever, that they needed to use reason instead of, quote, faith. Now, faith means a lot of things. Does it? It means uh, believing in a particular list of dogmatic points, like in the church, Catholic Church, or whatever, or the Protestant churches are the same. They say that, well, everything is everything you need to know and everything we need to live by is in the Bible. King James version of the Bible. Other versions, not so much. Certainly, the evangelicals don't like other traditions and other translations. And there are many, and there are many different books in the Bible. Which books do we study? Which books do we ignore? So we need to understand that that transition was real. So by the 18th century, in other words, the 1700s, we started the elites, the intellectual elites, and also the rulers began to see civilization as not as separate from religion. This comes from this culminated in the famous idea in the United States of a separation between church and state. So the state has its job, religion has its job, and people should be free to choose whatever religion they want, theoretically, and let the state look after the welfare of the people. Well, that worked really well in the United States, and as the 18th century moved into the 19th century, we became more and more rationalistic on the level of the elites. Now, the normal people, the farmers, the peasants, whatever you want to call them, the workmen, the working class, tended to be much more religious in practice than the elites and even the middle classes. Well, the middle classes it went through various phases, but religion was not the driving force that it was 100 years or 200 years previously. So there was a separation in the Western world between religion, faith, intuition, spirituality, and the regular life that we all need to live, how to learn, earn a living, what to do, what's the morality, uh, things like that. It started really after the real division happened in the United States earlier than other countries, but at around the beginning of the 20th century, the world, the Western world, which I'm including here, what's called Western Europe, the United States mainly, that all the people that follow that, so people who are educated in those areas, all moved very far away from religion and in fact, and atheism and agnosticism and alternative spiritualities like yoga, Buddhism began to emerge because one of the underlying reasons for the Western world's change was the exposure to alternative cultures. So there was a lot of movement, particularly in the English speaking world, by England's um, domination of India up until the 1940s. So this all came together, age of exploration, the earth is really round, science works, it has an application, science gets results, faith does not seem to get regular results. You can pray and pray and pray, as I've prayed for give me more money, and you're not going to get it. But with science and with reason, we can find ways of figuring out how to do all that using step-by-step approach, perhaps, something like that. And science works. Science has had great results in chemistry and physics, and more recently in biology. And so that action, and then you get back a result that works, changes people's ideas about religion, about spirituality, to saying, well, let's ignore spirituality and religion because what really works is what we can measure, what we can predict. So if I throw something in the air, it'll drop because of gravity. And so that you compound that with other laws of physics, and you can actually create machines, um, procedures to get what you need. So that's why we're spiritually impoverished because we embraced reason and science rather than religion. Right? Religion isn't always repressive and hasn't, even Christianity hasn't always been repressive. It's sort of like this. There are repressive periods, there's the opening up of ideas during the Renaissance, and then there's sort of a regression into burning witches and that kind of stuff. So it's not measurable other than what we know now is we live in a rules-based order, if you like. We live in a world based on procedures, on bureaucracy, on laws. All these things were established in many ways by the birth of the United States, which championed democracy, allowing everybody to have a say in the common weal, the common future or present. How did we solve these problems? And the United States was way in advance up until the Civil War. So before the Civil War, the United States had a very creative period of invention, of beginning of railroads on a large scale, the beginning of all kinds of new technologies, and it had a sense of optimism. There were negative things happening too, but basically, as I can describe the world around the United States around 1850 as a series of small communities, usually. There were some big cities, but basically small communities that developed out of the wilderness and where things like education, the story of Abe Lincoln, for example, and his ability to learn and exposure to books, and he was a very learned man. This was in a culture that was right in between, you know, farming and very simple farming in the wilderness and cutting down trees and all that stuff. So it was quite a feat, and the communities that existed up until the Civil War, both in the North and the South, other than the slavery situation, which I'm going to put aside for the moment, is that these people took care of each other. So a community very much resembled the community in the positive sense that you see in the movie, It's a Wonderful Life. People knew each other. There were people with money. The people with money knew the people without money and did what they could to help them, just as George Bailey did in the movie. He wanted everybody to have good housing, no matter what their ethnic background was. So that was the ideal. They took care of each other. Perhaps not as many, they weren't favoring alternative ethnic backgrounds, but in terms of their small communities, whether they were German communities or strictly English, Scots Irish, whatever, these communities all formed together and they would take care of each other. They didn't need a government to do that much. There was a series of people, like it is in all civilizations and cultures. There were rulers, ruling class types, people who were prime movers in that particular society who would take responsibility for things. So if someone was a drunk, everybody knew he or she was a drunk, and they kind of made sure they took care of him, watched out for them, and if they found him in a dangerous position, they'd move him and take him back home, and that was it. So there was a sense of community. And that community started to disappear gradually after the Civil War, when there was a great upsurge of factories. And they existed before the Civil Wars, but they really came into blossom after the Civil War. And not only in the United States, but around the world. The United States was quicker and more spectacular in its growth than any other country. So that by the time of World War One, even before then, we were the most productive and industrially advanced society, with some exceptions. You know, the English had a better navy. The Germans were pioneers in chemicals and other things. But basically, we produced um, more product in our factories, our efficient factories, than everybody else did. So we became a dominant culture in many ways. And after World War One, we continued that uh, to some extent until after World War Two. We became absolutely the most powerful country, the richest country in the world. And we were willing to help others become richer, really for our own benefit, because the more money we invested in things like the Marshall Plan in Europe, the more returns we would get on investment in that area. So if I had $1 million, then the Marshall Fund created revived industries in Europe, which then employed people, and then those employed people could pay for products that were made in the United States. And so we had a great trade surplus. So that was all great, but something happened between World War II and uh, let's say 2000, let's just say that, use that our arbitrary date. So we grew to be a consumer society. So our morals were based on the money we had and the money we were able to spend for ourselves and our families, not our cousins as much. So the whole extended family business disappeared gradually. It just fell by the wayside. People didn't want to be restricted by what grandma says or whatever, who had these old-fashioned ideas that weren't relevant to us. That was the great 1950s and 60s phenomena. The 1960s grew out of the 1950s, which was a rejection of the past. The 1950s was more focused on materialism and having a family and living in the suburbs and driving around in cars. And the 1960s was a period when it said, "Oh, we have all this money. Why do we need to have these same habits that our parents developed during the Depression and World War II? You know, save and be sober and at least appear to be sober and et cetera, et cetera. Have, stay married, la la la, all that kind of family value stuff." But those family values were not destroyed by the beatniks or the hippies in the 60s. They were already on the way out because of the premium that was placed on consumption. And that premium meant that rather than live for some higher moral purpose, we lived in order to please ourselves and our families. And gradually, as we moved the extended family away, and I'm not saying everybody did this, it just was a tendency to move everybody out of the way so that I can express myself the way I want to express myself, particularly in the 1970s, when you had dramatic changes that were visible of feminism, of civil rights, where the laws changed, so that we now had emphasized individual rights, which were less important, a century ago or 50 years before that period, where communities were still intact and still meant something. Uh, that changed after World War One, and a lot of the reasons I'm not going to get into, but it was a natural evolution of materialism. Materialism, capitalism, technology all work together to separate people away from communities, away from extended families and clans, into something else, something new. A consumer society where each family member had their own TV. Then with cable TV, they had their own favorite channels. And then with the internet and the ability, or before the internet, of course, there was video stores. You could go see a movie. So the elementary school kid had their VCR and their little videos, and the teenager had their little videos, and the adults had their little videos, and sometimes very adult videos. And the growth of porn was also another force in changing family structure. So people became more interested in their fantasies and expressing their fantasies and thinking that life is about fulfilling certain fantasies. Now, they could be sexual fantasies, but there were also other kinds of fantasies. People often talk about their bucket list, which is things they want to do. They want to visit the Vatican. They want to go to Bali. They want to go take a trip into India and hang out with some gurus. Whatever it is, there were all these different things going on that were basically the expression of the individual. The wife at home, who the husband went off to India to find his spiritual master, well, she paid the price, or vice versa, or whatever you want to call it. People were expressing themselves and fulfilling their own values, whatever they may be, whether they were very rich or whether they were middle class. Of course, the lower class and the so-called lower class and the so-called working class, who did not have a lot of income to dispense, had to make do somehow. And what changed things was that during the 1970s, feminism, which has its own origin, which I could talk about elsewhere perhaps, but the family structure was breaking down. So women had to make do with working, because who knows if their husband would stay, or whether their husband would meet a coworker they liked better, or they married their mistress instead of just financing her in her own apartment. The dramatic change. Traditionally, successful men had mistresses throughout history, pretty much, except for a few that were very mindful, very spiritual, or whatever. But for the most part, very successful men were expected to have, particularly in Europe. France is the notorious version of that. They had their mistresses. Well, what happened in America, and not so much in France, but what happened in America was that they would marry their secretaries rather than just keep them in an apartment or whatever, or a call girl. So this all conspires to move together. It wasn't any one thing. It wasn't porn. It wasn't women's liberation. It wasn't the change in attitudes about, being so I can express myself and do my own thing. Uh, it was more than that. It was all those things. It was all those things together. That was the big thing. But it was logical. It wasn't like, oh, they corrupted us. No, this was logical and inherent in materialism. Without spirituality, there can be no moral values. I mean, they are just arbitrary. The government says, all right, do this, or else you'll go to jail or be imprisoned or fined. That's one form of morality. But ultimately, that kind of morality, it eventually goes away, because the logic of the society is that, well, We live in order to consume. Our purpose of life is in order to fulfill our fantasies, whatever they are, or our ambitions, our personal ambitions. So I'll work for a company. And when the company start, if I'm any good, if the company doesn't meet my needs in many ways, I'll go switch to another company. That loyalty to work is no longer the case. That loyalty to a hierarchy is no longer in place. The hierarchy now is enforced so that you have to be careful now what you do and what you say, or you can be blacklisted, which is why many people no longer express themselves honestly in social media because their bosses could be looking. And also, increasingly, speech is being free speech is beginning to go away because now we rely on the government, not the community, to rule over us. And the government has its own interests. Okay, its own interests. How does it help the bureaucracy, the bureaucratic system? Does it help the donors who pay for the campaigns of politicians? And this is very important. When money talks and bullshit walks, the logic is corruption. It's inevitable. It's not anybody's fault. It doesn't mean that the senators, congressmen, presidents are bad people. They're just in a system that rewards people who reward the people with real power, which are the rich or the people that have the wherewithal to hire people with guns who can make a difference. The main event of this was the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. He was killed. It's obvious. You can look it up. You can do some research. Even the simplest research will get you to the point where Lee Harvey Oswald obviously didn't kill Kennedy. It was another kind of conspiracy. The general idea now is it was a kind of combination of intelligence organizations and gangsters, mafia, uh, mainly well, I'm not going to get into naming names. There's a lot of research on it. You can look it up for yourself, but it definitely wasn't one single lone crazed gunman. It was a whole organization that had developed after World War II, the National Security State, who had alliances in organized crime and alliances in external intelligence agencies, external organized crime as well, and the Jewish mafia, which was central in that, uh, as we all know. I mean, the Jewish and Italian mafias worked together, and they were kind of in combination during the 1950s and 60s. So this organization, what people call the deep state, which they misidentify it as the bureaucracy of the federal government. The bureaucracy of the federal government is manipulated by the deep state. The deep state is deeper than the government. You can look into that for yourself. If money talks and bullshit walks, then the logic applying game theory, which is you create a set of rules. If money talks and bullshit walks, and those of us who worked in government back in the day, all or I was a consultant, not necessarily in the government, but the government thought this way too. No good deed goes unpunished. Therefore, only bad deeds or manipulative or corrupt deeds are rewarded. Now, if you're not important enough, corruption will catch up with you and you're liable to be nabbed for it. But if you're high enough up on the totem pole, you have friends in the financial world. If you have friends in the political world to a lesser extent, in an intelligence community, whatever the national security state the operatives are, you can be immune from prosecution unless you mess with the wrong people. So people who rip off finance oligarchs, well, they're the people who can get in trouble. But if you run a corrupt scheme like what happened in the 2008 financial crisis, you create major crimes, you go scot-free. You have no possibility of being arrested. If you're a dilettante and investing in stocks and other things, you can get busted by insider trading. But if you're high up in the financial world and you're well connected with various mafias, various other institutions, you're fine. You're not going to get, no matter how many insider tradings you do, you're going to be fine. You're not going to get busted. And even if you are, if you have connection to the president, you'll get you'll get a pardon. Now, in this president, a little bit in other presidents, but this president more dramatically is profiting off of insider trading and his Republican friends in Congress as well. And before that, it was the Democratic Party, and but the Republicans are much better at this sort of corruption, and so we have a dramatically corrupt regime today, a government that is under the pay, in the pay of various interest groups, whether it be Wall Street, City of London, uh, who knows what mafias exist in different countries. They all have an effect. Even the people who run the criminal gangs in Mexico, they have their own lobbyists in Washington who watch out for their interests. You know, it's true. I'm sorry, guys, but crime pays if you're high enough and you have enough money to bribe people. So, and it's not because people are bad, it's because the system is operating now that way. So the legal system no longer works for people at the top. It doesn't, you can hire 20 lawyers and fix everything. That's just the way it goes. And if you don't like it, you can hire somebody to, threaten that person who was a danger to you's kids. And happens all the time. It has happened for some time. If you mess with the wrong people, whether it's on the criminal street, which I was familiar with for, don't ask me why, uh, you fuck with the wrong guys, you're going to get hurt and your family will be in danger. So they will threaten you. They will threaten your family if you are enough of a danger and not as much in the public sphere as, where if you would be assassinated, if you were a critic of the government and were assassinated in an obvious way, someone like Tucker Carlson, he's unlikely to be assassinated because his name is very big. So you have to understand how the system works. We're not in a democracy. Sorry, guys, no democracy. Forget it. You just have to make your arrangements and do what you can in life given the rules. The rules are money talks, bullshit walks. You can apply the legal system sometimes if you're a middle class, and but you can only apply it against people of your own class and below. You're not gonna touch the other people unless they're really, really obviously bad and they're not well connected. So that's a story about how things are on that level. Big long story. I could go on for hours about it because I've studied it very carefully. I'm a student of history and can trace all this back to the end of the Roman Empire, which I'm not gonna, which I love. I love history, but I'm not going to get into that now, or the sociological reasons for this, that, and the other. I'm going to appeal to you as a spiritual aspirant, if that's what you are. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be listening to this. That there are ways to deal with things instead of fussing about and worrying about whether there'll be nuclear war or whether your son or daughter in the military will be suffer terribly as the people on the aircraft carrier Lincoln are suffering right now from almost a year in without any recreation or time off. Okay, you can look into that as well. There's lots of stories about it now coming out. Okay, not every mass media organization is completely controlled. Of course, they will eventually express the story. I saw a story on it in CNN. New York Times, Washington Post won't touch it. They eventually will touch it because eventually, they look around and go, okay, we got to talk about that. Most of the media is controlled by various interest groups and various power arrangements. So if you work for the New York Times and you tell a story about Russia that is complementary to Russia, or you're out of a job, or even China. It's tough. It's tough to write anything. You have to get negative stories about the enemy. So Iran is a horrible place, and China is a horrible place. Russia's a horrible place. Cuba, they're all horrible, monstrous people. Well, that's what they want to tell you because Americans are less and less literate. Even though we depend on reason and science, the irony is that now that the bureaucracy has now encaged us in, now we're always being observed. Everything we say and do is being recorded somewhere. As this is recording somewhere on some database. We're not in that world of the 18th century reason and enlightenment, and let's all agree to disagree. Let's have a discussion. No, there's none of that, except on the outskirts of the culture, which is the alternative media, the alternative press, which has been around for a while, but is really blooming at the moment because people are hungry for reality. And so you can look into that as well, but this is not what I want to emphasize. How do you deal with the negativity that is being thrown not only from the mainstream media, which is all lies, almost everything in it is a lie, whether in sports, yeah, okay, well, celebrity gossip or whatever that's fine. But in terms of world events and even the really real things that are happening to real people in the world, they're somewhat addressed at times, but not if it upsets any political arrangements. Okay. So how do we deal with that negativity? And let me add the negativity of the alternative press. It goes, oh, look at the rulers, ruling class, they're evil. This Israel is evil because it's committing genocide. Yeah, sure, depending on what your classification of evil is. You have to define evil, and you have to define the morality behind what you're talking about. You can't just say it's evil. You have to say something about it. You have to describe evil as a particular process, a particular part of the world. And that's something you need to look at. But you can't let it bother you. You can't let it go, oh, what are we going to do? No, you can't do anything. Everything's controlled. What you can do is you can change your consciousness to be more accepting of what's going on. Okay, money talks, bullshit walks. I get it. I'd like to see something else, though. And by cultivating my own spirituality, I'm working in that direction. Because here's the key, there is another world. There's something called the spiritual world with all kinds of entities, with gods and goddesses and aliens and spirits and just a myriad of things exist in alternative worlds, the alternative dimensions that sometimes interact with our own. And there's enormous material on that. People like to deny it, but the proof is simply overwhelming that these anomalous events all of a sudden crop up. I've seen anomalous events. This couldn't have happened, but it did, right? That kind of thing. Some people see spiritual entities as I have. Some people these do see UFOs and can connect with that level, right? Uh, and it's legitimate. They don't have mental health problems. They are, except for what you give them because you won't believe them. But these are all real things that happen to people. The world, the power elite, wants you to have a very narrow view. Work, do as I say. Here's your boss. Dot 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 dot. Go fulfill your fantasies in games, right? So your frustration about being male, well, you can work them out in these war games. Your frustration about whatever it is, your identity. I don't know what women look at, shopping channels, whatever it is. There's all kinds of escapism. There's drugs. A lot of drugs are now illegal. Legal, like, okay, marijuana is pretty much available almost everywhere, which is fine. Mushrooms are beginning to be more popular. Psychedelics are really coming back after decades of repression where you couldn't even study them. It was, you would be thrown out of academia if you did. But today, we're just coming up with all this stuff. This is great. You have a very narrow political structure, a fairly narrow economic structure. There's no difference between politics and economics as far as I'm concerned, but it's fairly narrow. There's a relatively narrow. Markets are managed. There are no real markets other than, flea markets or something like that. But if you look at the stock market, it's completely manipulated by artificial intelligence and sovereign wealth funds, international wealth funds, who just put their hand on the balance and then profit off of it. So forget markets. You just have to try to figure out which way they're manipulating it. Okay, so you can't be messing with that. You just have to look at the trends, and whatever the trends are, whatever you need to do, you do. But your main process internal, your negativity, where did that negativity come from? Well, it came from your parents, your grandparents, and so on. It came from the culture. You're not good enough. You're not in shape. You're not rich enough. You're not tough enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not handsome enough. That's what society throws at you to sell product. In spirituality that I follow, which I call, for convenience, the perennial philosophy, we're all perfect just the way you are. As I've alluded to in my other videos, I subscribe to the Mr. Rogers spiritual way of looking at things. I like you just the way you are. Now, he meant I love you just the way you are, because he was a Presbyterian, truly spiritual being, and he gave this to the children who were constantly being abused or hit or saying, "Oh, you bad boy," or whatever, "bad girl, you can't be thinking about that, da da da, don't ask that question." When someone on a television screen tells you that you're good. You're good just the way you are. You're good just the way you are. You don't need to change one bit. You don't need to lose weight. You don't need to get in shape. You're fine just the way you are. You might like to do it. It's fun. It could be fun. If it's not, don't do it. You're driving yourself into ambition, driving yourself to work out till you're chiseled, right? Got that, look with the big, I don't know, shoulders, breasts, big arms, et cetera, et cetera. Knock yourself out if you like it, if you love it. But in order to improve yourself, you don't need improvement. You're fine just the way you are. That's the essence of spirituality. So worrying about world events, turn off the damn TV. Don't go on anything unless you totally trust that source. I've been kind of addicted to the wars, in Ukraine and Iran. So I follow them. I've been following them for a long time, and these kinds of events, and I get hung up on it, and I knew all these minutiae about it, but ultimately it's a hobby. It's part of my interest in history. I'm moving away from it now gradually because I find it's depressing me a little bit, because it, I don't have, there's nothing I can do. I can study it, but I'm kind of bored with studying it. I'm kind of interested in other things. So use your judgment, but try to stay away from these world events or national events that you can do nothing about, right? You can't do anything about AI and how it's going to be implemented. It's going to be implemented one way or the other, and you have no say unless you had a major corporation. Even then, yeah, you do have some agency, but not that much, because there's other guys that are bigger than you, or a bunch of the consortium of people who are smaller than you, but coming together, they're bigger than you. So power is real. Power is about being able to influence events. So forget about it. Forget about the news. The news is BS from top to bottom. And start looking at yourself. Where is evil? Look first inside. Look at your own activities. Look at the things you've done. Don't blame yourself, because, like the events I'm talking about in government, they're about a process, a set of values that were expressed, that you express. So I express the value that I want to do my own thing. So I don't want to pay attention to what anybody else needs. I want to do what I want to do. Well, okay, so I got rewarded in a negative way sometimes and sometimes in a positive way. But I had to look at, was I harming anyone? That's what I've been looking at actually recently, is to see how did I harm people? And so without guilt or blame. The problem with guilt is that it doesn't work. It just makes you feel bad. It depresses your energy. So what you want to do is say, okay, the process that I went through caused it. Now I know not to harm other people or to be more sensitive to other people feel. So now I'm more concerned with, not concerned about the shit I did in the past. I'm concerned about how do I make people feel now, today? Do I help that person and contribute to his happiness? Do I smile at this person or am I like, so yeah, sometimes I am kind of growling and internally, and I don't pay any attention to other people. I don't care about that. So as we go on, we find the things that we can work on ourselves, and that creates a spiritual energy in the world that has an effect on other people. Take it through faith. I've seen it directly how you can create a negative vibration and a positive vibration. So our job is to create the positive vibration, not ignoring the negative, not pretending there's no war in Iran or in Ukraine or anywhere else, but by not pretending, by understanding that they're a result of processes that were logical. And so you accept it, like selfishness is logical if materialism is the underlying cause. It's just logical. Step by step by step by step, you can figure out that the only thing I have to do is please myself. Now, in order to avoid conflict, I have to please my wife as well because I don't like her, you know. But that's not the I have to see, well, how can I please her really? Not because she's complaining, but in order to please her really, to things I know are positive. So I give her some positive energy as best I can. I don't always. And that's my spiritual process. And that's what we'll be talking about for the next period of time. Again, I'm going to probably post once or twice a week. So thank you for listening to me, and we'll go till next time.